I got word yesterday that the Congressional Gold Medal for Glenn and Ty and Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith's family got passed unanimously in Congress.
Oh,
so
cool.
It is now going to the Senate for a confirmation vote.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Lionheart Radio with your host, Rick Alexander. Today, I am in Encinitas, California, and I'm interviewing Sean Lake. He's a former pro snowboarder and the co-founder of Bub's Naturals, and he has had a pretty wild life. And that wild life has led to the formation of Bub's Naturals and an extension of that, a lot of charity work, which I know will resonate with the Lionheart Radio audience, and we'll get into that. But Sean, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. This is great.
Yeah, so typically I say thanks for being on, but I feel like since I'm in your home and your studio,
I'm kind of flipping the script on you.
Thanks for having me.
That works out. You're welcome.
Yeah, you ask me the questions.
Yes, well, we're going to talk first about how it feels to run 200 plus miles with a plate vest, because that is messed up.
Truthfully, the Lionheart Radio audience is probably sick of that story.
All right, I just heard it, so we'll skip that one and just talk about how much weight was in there.
It was like 27 pounds and then plus whatever water was.
Yeah. So
it was like 30 something.
You were stacked up.
Yeah.
I did something that is so small by comparison, but it's the only real data point I have. Aside from having a weight vest and doing weighted runs with my wife while she was pregnant, I would wear a 20-pound vest to simulate the weight gain that she was going through.
Did you wear it in the front?
Yeah.
Did you?
So I started with it in the equally distributed.
Yep.
And then I would move it, and then my posture was so jacked I moved it back.
Yeah. Screwing up
but
it
was fun for a little while I'm hunched over, and she loved it because, you know, one, our pace was the same, but she's 8 months pregnant. My wife's a complete badass, so
yeah,
she would be running and she'd be like, well, let's go knock out a quick 4-miler. And I'm like, okay, grab the weight vest. And then we're running the same pace, but she's a runner, so she was really ready to get after it even then. And I'm like, you know, you can pull back a gear. It's cool. Yeah. Because I'm dying right now with a 20-pounder on for this 4-mile run. But that, you know, that was a nice way to kind of get into experiencing what a pregnant woman experiences, which is, hey, imagine if you were 20, 25, 30 pounds heavier. And I was only wearing the vest when we were doing exercise because it would be a little bit impractical around the house.
Right. So this has nothing to do with the show, but have you seen these guys that hook the electrodes up to them to simulate what childbirth feels like?
I just heard about that, and we're done. Like we just had our second child, so we've got one boy and one girl.
Done with it.
We have this conversation about how done we are done. We're also in the trenches of, you know, 2 kids in diapers.
Yeah.
And I just started hearing about the idea of like how you can simulate that. And the only thing I can think, and I don't know what the rules are in this podcast, but the only thing I can think is if they do that wrong and it's really about pushing, wouldn't a guy worry about shitting himself? Like if it was that much muscle pressure going on.
Well, that's a real thing that happens. So
that is a real thing that happens. I remember hearing stories about that in childbirth class. Like, hey guys, don't be surprised if, and they kind of left it open-ended and we're like, if what? And then someone kind of raised their hands and they got real graphic and they're like, hey, there's a lot of pushing going on.
Yeah.
Hey, you know, sometimes when you're pushing, other things happen. And we're like, oh, right. The miracle of life has a downside to it.
There's a shadow to this miracle. So right now so this is actually pretty wild. I think a lot of people probably can't even fathom. So you have 2 kids now. So you're doing the family thing while balancing a startup.
Yeah. Well, the startup life was something that was totally unexpected. I didn't go like pursuing, hey, I want to be a 40-something-year-old entrepreneur.
Right.
It kind of found me, which is, you know, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what was on the agenda was getting married to my wife, Heather, and we always knew we wanted to have 1 to 2 children. Mm-hmm. Settled on 2. 2 is the magic number. But yeah, there is nothing wilder than having 2 kids in diapers and starting a business from scratch.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I mean, I literally just running my business. Like I cannot, you add like one thing on top of me and I'm like going to crumble. So I really can't imagine, but you've had a pretty interesting life leading up to this moment, right? So I'm trying to think of how I want to say this tactfully. So you have always been balancing sort of a life that's a little bit different than everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a safe way of saying it.
Right.
My parents would say it probably a little bit differently than that, more colorfully. But I went through high school like everyone. I'm from Massachusetts, from Winchester, Mass, and every one of my friends was in this collegiate pipeline. Like, you go through school, you take your SATs, and you get to the best school possible.
Yep.
And I was the guy, along with this group of friends, that we were doing that, but we were asking a lot of questions. Just call it, 1980s teen angst. Like, we were just, a little bit counterculture, listening to punk rock or alternative, and just, looking at life a little bit differently. And I was always drawn to like independent sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I never thrived in a team sports setting back then. So skateboarding. I fell in love with skateboarding. This was during the Mike McGill, Tony Hawk, Bones Brigade era. And that was my entire life. And then I would get into track and running and swim because you're supposed to, but everything was a little bit counterculture. And that led to, well, you're 18, you have to go to college. And so I literally chose a college school in the most punk rock fashion I could conceive of. And that was, I don't feel like writing an essay. So I'm only going to apply to schools where I don't have to write an essay. And in hindsight, it was an incredibly immature move. But at the time, it was like, well, hell yeah.
Right.
So I did that, and I ended up going to college in New Mexico State. Well, New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, New Mexico, is about as far away from, suburban Boston, Massachusetts as you can get. But I went there because I wanted to skateboard and I wanted to snowboard. Like, those were super important stuff for me to do. So I chose that and almost immediately dropped out of school to go move up to the mountains. I got, a little bit of a spark from my closest friend from high school, a guy named Glen Doherty, who we're going to talk about a lot here. And Glenn was going out to Utah to go be a ski bum, and we were just all talking about how college just wasn't for us. And meanwhile, our friends are in that pipeline, like 4 years and done, going into getting married, going into pumping out the kids. And we just had this itch to do something different. And that was just to explore life, whatever that looked like.
Yeah.
And the most attractive thing we could do was, let's move to this crazy state called Utah that's filled with these things called Mormons. And let's go figure out what it's like to go ski powder, or in my case, snowboard powder. And that was in the early 90s. Next thing you know, college is in the rearview mirror, and I'm working as a dishwasher in a restaurant. And I'm riding powder every day, with my best friend Glenn and all of our new friends out in Utah. So it was
just doing the ski bum thing.
Total ski bum thing. And every summer was like met with a really colorful job. Like, I'm going to go work construction one summer. I'm going to go paint houses one summer. Glenn worked as a ranch hand. That was one of his more unique jobs. He also was a river guide down in Moab, Utah. So, very colorful resumes by the time you're 21.
Right. So for people listening to this, when you just said Glen Doherty, I'm sure that there was like probably all these flashbacks of, this was a very polarizing issue over the last few years for sure. So Glenn was one of the former service members that was killed in Benghazi. And that's been a catalyst for a lot of your life at this point, it seems like. Yeah.
So, we're talking about that time when we were just running around as reckless teenagers and early 20-year-olds. But, Glenn was my oldest friend, basically going back to middle school. Mm-hmm. And we're two best friends. He's a brother to me. And Glenn was a Navy SEAL. And when Glenn, got out of the service, he started contracting for the CIA. So he was doing government contract work, and he basically had this job where in contracting, you're gone for about half the year. Like, you do these 2-3 month deployments, then you're home, then you're gone, and you're all over the world. You're in Libya, you're in Afghanistan, you're in Iraq, you're in Mexico, you're in Beirut. And he literally went to all those countries as a contractor working as a GRS agent for the CIA, doing security work, doing some intel gather work. Very colorful life, but that's what he was doing. And he was stationed in Tripoli in Libya in the fall of 2012 when the attacks on Benghazi and the U.S. consulate happened.
Yeah.
So Glenn was one of the 2 Navy SEALs who was killed saving lives down in Benghazi.
Right. So to really like, I guess I just wanted to take that short detour so that the audience kind of knows like what we're talking about here. But so then if you go back to when you guys are kind of ski bumming it, I remember when we had talked pre-show, there was this sort of these moments of like thinking that there's probably more to life and like wanting to sort of see what that looks like. And you guys went through that at a similar time.
Yeah. I mean, we're both 24 years old, turning 25, and you do hit these moments in your life where you kind of wonder what's next.
Yeah.
And I was in this kind of like great period where I was getting free snowboards, I was traveling, I was getting a small salary, like I was living the dream.
You sort of made it snowboarding.
I had made it into that chapter. Glenn was pursuing a career as a professional skier, and he was a ripping skier. I mean, he could ski with the best of them. Mm-hmm. But this was in the 90s, and the ski industry wasn't where it is today. So even as talented as he was, he had a really hard time breaking through. So regardless of that, those two things are happening, but we both kind of had this itch. Hey, we can't do this forever. So, what does the future hold? Now, all those friends from high school, they've all graduated from college. They're all taking their first real job. They're meeting their future wives. And Glenn and I are kind of professional fuck-offs. Mm-hmm. And we're having a great time doing it.
Yeah.
But that itch is there, like that calling. And so Glenn traveled one summer before he turned 25. He came back, and we had this big sit-down. We're just talking about life. And we're talking about what we should do. And Glenn says, if I haven't made it as a professional skier by the time I'm 25, I'm going to join the Navy and become a Navy SEAL. Now, this is in the mid-90s, right? Like, no one knew anything about Navy SEALs.
Right. Charlie Sheen, right?
Yeah, that's Charlie Sheen. That was it. Like, yeah. The Charlie Sheen movie was it.
Yeah.
And, oh, how times have changed.
Right.
So that's all we knew about it. And Glenn had said, yeah, well, when I was down in Costa Rica a couple weeks ago, I was surfing with some guys. I met some guys on the beach, and they were Navy SEALs. And we hung out for a couple of days, and they told me I had what it takes. And I was like, wow, okay. I mean, I'm going to go back to school. That was not what I would have expected from him, but in a way it was. So the thing about Glenn is Glenn was always looking for that next challenge. So he didn't settle for like an easy job. He would take the hardest job. And, being a river guide is pretty cool, but it's hard work.
Right.
Being a ranch hand is about as unglorious as it gets, but it's cool and you learn a lot. So there was this element of challenging himself in almost every decision that he would make. And ultimately it came down to how he defined himself through kind of this consistent self-improvement. And that was a theme over and over again. So as his friend, you kind of draft off that, you get inspired by the people around you. And he was one of those people that, he was always going to go for a run. He was always going to be fit. He was always going to, ski early and ski late and just kind of like, to suck the marrow out of life, so to speak. So, and we just saw life the same way. So we had those adventures together kind of in pursuit of awesome or of fun.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people can take something away from that because right now we live in a time, well, especially like when you look at Navy SEAL, I mean, the Trident, I just saw it was like one of the most recognized symbols in the world, like right behind the Nike swoosh and I think the Budweiser like crown.
Wow.
And then the Trident. So a lot of times now, and especially because I was an instructor over there at the Blood Schoolhouse, so we see a lot of people that come in specifically because it's flashy, specifically because it's a rock star, it seems like a rock star job till you're in the barracks like sucking. But people have this like persona about it. But it's really interesting to hear you say that because he's, if you look at sort of Glenn's life and both of your lives, you're like picking these jobs specifically because of the difficulty and the growth that will happen when you're doing them, not because, so like, that's why I think it's important to recognize, like back then when he wanted to go be a SEAL, like almost akin to going to be a ranch hand in the idea that it's really hard. And a lot of people, it's not this huge thing. It's not this rock star thing.
Yeah. And I mean, for anyone thinking of that today, like try and put yourself in the mindset of 1995 when there's no internet.
Right.
There's no real resources. And all you know is that this stands for something that's kind of badass. Like it's really vague.
Right.
But you want the challenge. And, skiing and snowboarding were their own challenges.
For sure.
They were incredibly fun. But there is that like what's next drive that we both have had, through our whole lives.
Right.
And I knew that I couldn't snowboard forever. So for me, it was school. Like I wanted to go and get a degree in political science. And I had this thing about joining the State Department. That was because I thought I could travel. Yeah. I was like, I'll join the State Department, get a degree in political science, and I can travel the world.
Yeah.
What a great adventure. I was not thinking of the bureaucracy of the government,
right,
or like
right.
some of the downsides to a job like that probably would have killed me.
Yeah.
More on the inside than the out.
Right. The soul would have killed the soul.
The soul.
Yeah.
Because being a professional snowboarder, or I would just say a sponsored snowboarder, and then going into that life would, let's just say it would be a radically different adjustment.
Sure.
So for Glenn, it was kind of a natural extension, even though at the time it seemed like this wild thing to do. So I drove him down to the Navy recruiter's office, rolled in there. He signed his paperwork, and a couple weeks later, boom, he's gone.
Yeah.
He turned 25. He wasn't a pro skier. So hell, he's going to go, learn about life in a completely different way. He blew a lot of minds in the Utah community. Like all of our ski bum friends were like, "What? What are you doing? That's crazy."
I bet.
And those that really knew him were like, "Yeah, man." And next thing you know, 9 months later, we're all traveling down to Coronado to watch him get his, get pinned there. And that was another wild experience, because now I'm surrounded by, his classmates and these guys that Glenn just had this absolutely surreal experience with from my lens as a civilian guy who's ski bumming out in Utah.
Right.
And these guys end up becoming some of my close friends over the next 20 years. And they're just some absolutely unreal humans. Like, really glad Glenn made that choice just so that I could inherit some really kick-ass quality friends in life.
Yeah, for sure. No, it is. I don't even push like the military thing in my own life really at all, other than to say like, I got to work with some of the best humans in the world. And that to me is like what has made being a veteran totally worth it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Actually, it's funny because I had to extract that information from you in our first time we talked.
Yeah.
But that humility goes a long way too. Like it's not what defines you; it's a part of you.
Sure.
There's a much bigger thing I think that defines all of us, whatever you do in life. I guess kind of circling back, Glenn transitioned out of the Navy, out of being a SEAL. He did 10 years in the service. And when he got out, contracting was this amazing kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
So it was amazing in that the paycheck was 3 times what he was making as an E6 enlisted guy.
Right.
In the
Still
Navy.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the pay is phenomenal. Like you're a 6-figure contractor and you're home half the year.
Right.
So boy, as Glenn would say, man, that's a sore dick.
Yeah.
You just can't beat it. And,
That's awesome. Yeah.
I apologize to any of your listeners that are a little bit sensitive, but
no, not at all.
These things happen.
If they've survived me for a year, you're good.
They're going to deal with that one. There's a couple of them are writing that down right now. They're like, sore dick. I'm going to use that one. Perfect.
Yeah.
But no, so Glenn, he gets out and you've got this amazing job because there's adventure, there's travel, there's risk.
Yep.
And I akin it to like, being a professional athlete who's retired. Like you're used to this treatment and this adrenaline and this rush of whatever your job is. And then suddenly you're not on the sidelines anymore. You're not in the game anymore. So how do you continue to make that transition? It's a very tough transition to make.
Yeah.
Contracting was great. You get all this money. You still get the excitement. You got really big guns and you're going around doing, a bunch of cool shit and occasionally blow some stuff up still.
Yep.
Well, the downside is you're gone half the year. So any relationship you have is really fractured.
Yep.
And ultimately it's a very temporary type of work. Like it's unsustainable.
Right.
You can't do that work forever. Like what are the chances that you can contract into your 60s with that kind of workload and that kind of like grind on your body? It's totally unsustainable.
Yep.
So it was a kryptonite. It had this downside to it, but it was also like he had to do it. But he was always looking at what's next.
Mm-hmm.
What's the transition to civilian life? So like the first thing he did when he got out of the Navy, he went and knocked out his bachelor's degree. Like just made it his job. In between deployments, going on like online courses, whatever he could do, knocks that out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's flight school. All right, I'm going to be a commercial pilot maybe. So he goes and gets all of his flight hours. And I remember because he would test out some of his flight hours on me. And that's a whole nother story about when I had to fly us home from Vegas because he was too drunk to fly the plane.
Yes.
And I'd never flown a plane before. I should say hungover, not drunk.
Right.
But it's a thin line there between Saturday night and Sunday
Depending
morning.
how early it is, it definitely is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so he would do that. He went to go get his pilot's license. And, then he was, maybe I'll be a firefighter. So all these things are happening. And Glenn finally settled on moving back to Utah and becoming a physician's assistant and going into a PA program at the University of Utah.
Okay.
And he was like, I'm going to do it. This Libya deployment is going to be my last one. I've applied for school. Like I see it. The lane is set. And we're like, whoa, man, like this is real. This is real.
Yeah.
And this is, was it really going to be his last deployment? Well, ultimately it was because of, the shit show that happened in Benghazi.
Right.
But the idea is that, what are you going to do next? How do you transition out into civilian life? How do you make those steps? And it was something that he struggled with. It was one of the few areas in his life where I could say Glenn struggled. Most of the time he was out there being an inspiration and a leader to everyone.
Right.
So
yeah, but you get, a lot of purpose and lifestyle and all these things yanked out from under you, and you find yourself in chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to a broader point, which is a lot of what I think we'll talk about here. But the reason I distance myself from being a veteran, I don't necessarily distance myself, but the reason I don't make that so much of my priority is because I was looking at all of these people that got out, and I really consciously did this for about a year. And I looked at the transition and how badly it got for people, and how so many people, they have this idea that they want to get out, and then they get out, but because they don't know what they're going toward, they end up looking backward. And so then they become that angry veteran stereotype is a very real thing. And I realized I have to distance myself from that because I'm going to be pissed all the time. They're angry. It's just an angry, weird cycle you end up in. And so for me, I made that conscious decision, but that goes to a broader point, which is there's so many opportunities to carry a gun and do the same job essentially and get paid better, which is what the contracting ends up to be for a lot of people. And so I guess just thinking about this, you watching Glenn go through this transition had to be pretty profound for you, because this is a person that's always sort of, going after things. And then it's
yeah, it was interesting because at this time I'm not snowboarding anymore. I was literally waiting to take the civil service exam back in 2002 or whatever, and I ended up getting recruited to become a team manager for Burton Snowboards. And so I'm just kind of dancing through, waiting to take this big exam, join the State Department. I've got this whole career track, and all of a sudden I take a huge left-hand turn and I work in the snowboard industry. And it was a really natural fit because I'd been snowboarding for so long, and it was amazing. And all of a sudden I have to move to San Diego to take this job. And a lot of the snowboard industry is actually right around here in San Diego, Southern California. Yeah, well, the snowboarders like being close to the surfers and the skateboarders, and they're all here kind of leading the culture.
Yep.
So, the snowboarders kind of followed along. Plus, it's nice to be under a palm tree when it's not snowing out.
Yeah.
So
you get to go to the winter on your own terms.
Yeah. So a couple years after Glenn moves to Coronado, I moved to Encinitas. And then a couple years later, we're roommates. Mm-hmm. He gets a divorce, I get a divorce. And next thing you know, we're two guys that are 40 years old, living together in Encinitas, running around town. And so, I watched that whole transition. And, during that time, I'm working as the marketing director at DC Shoes, which is a part of Quicksilver. I got to work with Shaun White and some really big named athletes, which was really cool for me because as an athlete, I was never at that level. I was a snowboarder who got some free trips and got to be in magazines and do some cool stuff. But this, the modernization of action sports made it really neat.
Yeah.
So I had this kind of career path going, and then Glenn had this transition going, and, watching him go through that was very interesting. And a lot of big talks about hey, what do you want to do? What are you thinking? And because he was always so positive, I don't think, I think maybe we didn't give it as much attention as it could have gotten, because, it's a topic that you kind of left open for him to bring to the table at the time. And he was always looking for those answers. So it wasn't like he sat back, and he never became the angry veteran. He became a guy who was looking for that. And in the meantime, hey, we're in the middle of a recession, and you got a mortgage to pay.
That's right. That's huge.
So the conditions around this are also not to be lost. Is, you know, remember 2010, 11, 12, those were bad years for this economy.
Right.
That's
a very good point.
So that was all happening, and he had found that answer. Like, he was coming out of it. Like, in 2009, it wasn't so pretty. Like, he wasn't sure. There was a lot of uncertainty, and you know, and he wasn't very happy. And being around a Glen not happy was like unheard of.
Yeah.
But he didn't wallow in it. He figured it out quick, and he kind of like came out of that to look for solutions.
Yep.
And he just took a long time to find the right solution. And in between, you're going to Libya, you're going to Iraq, you're going here, and you're making great money.
Yep.
So that was that was a tough thing to watch. And not to jump ahead, but you know, after Glen died, and keep in mind, Glen was best friend to tons and tons of people. You know, we're talking hundreds of people. So at Glen's memorial, like, you know, in the town of Winchester, where we had his funeral, Winchester, Massachusetts, the entire town turned out and lined the streets. I mean, it was a goosebump moment to this day. And watching that happen, we realized in full, Glen's family and myself, that we were experiencing something much, much bigger than our own sense of personal loss.
Yeah.
And, you know, Glen was best friend to hundreds of people, but he was an inspiration to this nation, you know, when it comes to heroism. So Glen's sister, Katie, and I were talking in her basement with a couple high school friends, and she said, we have to do something to protect Glen's legacy. And she's like, should we start a foundation? We got to do something. And we were like, yeah, that's a great idea. Like, let's start a foundation. Well, what does a foundation look like? And we said, well, a foundation, well, I mean, it looks like helping other people out, because that's what Glen did. Well, how do we help people out? Well, we settled on educational scholarships for special operators and their families to help ease in that transition out of active duty life to civilian life. Let's help these guys solve the problem that Glen couldn't solve for himself. Let's start a foundation, and let's ride a little bit of this wave of attention, but more importantly, like, let's just protect Glen's legacy. And so we did it. We had no idea what we were doing, and we started a foundation to give scholarships to, you know, special operators from all branches of the government and help them get out so that they wouldn't fall into the same scenario that Glen did. And it was a pretty wild jump into the nonprofit landscape. I mean, I had worked alongside nonprofits, but this was something entirely different. And I guess I should probably back up a step. I was the executor of Glen's estate, so he had kind of left me in charge of all of his legal affairs. We had done that with each other because, hey, when you're two single guys in your 40s, you're like,
yeah, right.
You get all my crap. All right, you get all my crap. We used to jokingly call it inheriting each other's debt.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was in this role to help facilitate that, and it seemed like the best thing to do. Like, let's tell Glen's story of what an amazing person he was to, you know, future operators and just future folks that we could help out. And that was it. We sprung board into this new kind of chapter. We got an endowment for the nonprofit, and all of a sudden I'm a, you know, marketing consultant, snowboard thrill seeker who's helping vet out charitable opportunities for veterans. And it was an unforeseen, really, really gratifying experience to have gone through the last several years.
I'm sure. So in order to be successful, you know, in nonprofit or for-profit space, you really need to be able to tell the story of why you're doing what you're doing. And you have such a powerful story. But I also don't want it to get lost on the listener that at the time that you're trying to emerge with this story and do this really good thing, you find yourself in the middle of a media political hailstorm, essentially, right?
Yeah. So, you know, Benghazi came with a whole big stink to it.
Right.
And there was a lot of conspiracy theories on the left and on the right about what actually happened there. And as the executor of Glen's estate, and I was listed as his next of kin with his government work, like, I got pulled into a pretty big political scene. And keep in mind that, you know, we're all managing our daily lives. Like, we all have our fiancés or our soon-to-be wives and your career and everything that you naturally have to do. And on top of that, you're managing this political whirlwind. And, you had Mitt Romney in the 2012 political election referencing having met Glenn. And he did. He actually met Glenn at a party once. And he's talking about that up. Then you've got Glenn's mom on the other side yelling at Mitt Romney to not talk about her son, to pay respect and not use him as a political tool in an election.
Right.
You've got President Obama, who's not saying a thing, and Hillary Clinton, who gets a big black eye for effectively mismanaging the State Department from the top down. And I realize to some listeners that's a subjective statement. I can say from where I have sat and experiences that I have had, it is not a very pretty picture to look at the chain of events that happened that led up to the attack, but also what happened post-attack. And when you learn about that, it sucks on so many levels.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it through the lens of protecting the legacy of your best friend, and ultimately, like, how do you help out guys in the future? Because I can't bring Glenn back. But in going through all this political stuff, maybe I can help guys for the future. So we encounter a couple of things while I'm managing Glenn's estate. The first thing is his life insurance. So when you're a contractor for the U.S. government, kind of regardless of what branch, you need to have a very specific life insurance policy. Glenn bought that policy. And when Glenn died, obviously I'm in the cleanup, I'm in his laptop, I'm figuring out all of his different stuff, and I have to apply for a death benefit from this insurance company because Glenn died. And I get denied. And all of a sudden I'm in like early 2013, and I'm like, what? How Glenn got denied? And all of a sudden I peel back the onion a layer, and it turns out that there's a clause in some old Congressional act that called the Defense Base Act that said, hey, if you are single, not married, with no dependents, which Glenn was, he was unmarried, no kids, you're ineligible for this death benefit. So I said, well, wait a second. He paid for this life insurance policy. He had to have it. It was a mandatory policy, and the insurance company's not going to pay? How the hell am I supposed to manage that?
Right.
Never mind the politics. Now I'm talking about, like, hey, there's a lot of guys that Glenn served with that were single guys. Well, if another Benghazi happens, they're SOL, man. Like, okay, opportunity. How do I fix this? So we got political, and there was a little bit of a stink around publicity and Fox News trying to cover the idea that the Obama administration wouldn't help out this family go through this grieving process by respecting their wishes with this insurance. And I end up having a couple meetings. I fly out to meet with Congress because they have the Congressional Benghazi hearings, and I meet with Trey Gowdy, who is amazing. I meet with Elijah Cummings, who is amazing. Like, both sides of the aisle, and I tell Glenn's story to them, and I definitely expressed what was happening on the insurance front. And I kind of knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, but I had to put it on the table, like, hey guys, we're kind of dealing with something here.
Right.
And ultimately I ended up getting a meeting with the CIA director, this guy John Brennan, he's retired now. He's been in the news a bunch lately for a whole different set of reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm in a meeting room, Katie and I, and Director Brennan and a handful of his attorneys, and we're talking about this death benefit. And there's no resolve there, but it's a crazy meeting for me. Like, this is surreal. Like, I'm meeting with the guy that I see on CNN, the director of the CIA, to talk about Glenn and life insurance policies. Like, this is the strangest life I could live.
Yeah.
And I remember not so much the interactions there, other than kind of suggesting that if something didn't happen on the positive, that it would turn into a very public negative. And about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months later, we keep getting little bits of word that something was going to happen, but we didn't know what. And we get word eventually from Director Brennan's office that they were not only going to pay Glenn's death benefit, that they were going to go back all the way to Beirut and pay the death benefit forward for every family that fell under that same category as Glenn.
Whoa.
And we're talking like 50 plus families. So, like, I'll give you the one example because it's all these things give me goosebumps, but I get an email from one of the family survivors from the terrorist attack in Afghanistan. So do you remember the hero workout, the CIA 7?
Yep.
So, and that movie Zero Dark 30 kind of talks a little bit about that attack that blew up a bunch of CIA operatives and former security guys.
Yep.
So one of the CIA 7s, think of it every time you lift the 70-pound kettlebell, that person's family received this benefit. And they found out from the CIA that, hey, the reason this is happening is because the Doherty family and their representatives really pushed for this to happen. And so they wrote the most unbelievable thank you note. And, I get forwarded that along.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, wow, this family that I've literally sweat in the gym paying homage to them. I've now been a small part of shifting and changing their healing from this incident. And that's been a really powerful feeling, like, wow, I just was a small part of helping 50 plus people change their lives because of this, this glitch in this insurance. And then the CIA went a step further, and I'm kind of speaking informally, I'm going to butcher this, but they basically have a protocol to help educate their contractors about how they need to get their own proper insurance on their own. So it was cool. Like, I've been a part of not only helping Glen's family in the past, but setting up other families from the past and help this next generation that's going to do Glen's job, because it's not like guys aren't going to go into that line of work. And now they're going to go into that line of work, hopefully a little bit better prepared, just in case, the worst thing happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. So, I mean, there's not much we can, tragedy is just going to happen in so many lives. A lot of people kind of take their licks and sort of let me just get through this. What I think, the foundation and, I guess all of these families are really, I'm sure that they have a lot of gratitude, because the reason that all this good happened is because you looked at this sort of tragedy, but then you met it, right? And then you saw this problem, and then you just started solving it, which is even what has led to us with Bub's Naturals and all of that, which we'll get into.
Yeah. I didn't think of it like that at the time. I guess I've always kind of looked at problem solution type stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. You're just a solution oriented kind of person.
Yeah. I've never been one to really wallow in self-pity.
Right.
And I think the culture that I've been raised around is a bunch of independent free thinkers, snowboarders, skateboarders, surfers. They tend to view the world differently.
Sure. But
so do some of these special operators. These are guys that do things differently. And even in a military organization, you get that solution-minded mentality. So, when Glenn and I both settled into Encinitas in 2008, we joined a gym here in town called SEALFit. And it was called US CrossFit and SEALFit. And it was owned by a former SEAL named Mct Oil. And we found ourselves at this gym, enmeshed in this culture of like-minded individuals. And these are people that have become, my closest friends over the last decade. Mark was at my wedding, and this crew just kind of became our own little mini cadre. So I've always been surrounded by good people that are forward thinking. I don't have a lot of Eeyores in my life, the doom and gloom stuff.
Right.
But yeah, when Glenn died, I had to go into go mode. Glenn had entrusted me with a responsibility that was much bigger than my grief at the time. And if I had one concern in the back of my head, it was, when am I going to take the time to process this and go through this?
Yeah.
But part of the processing was going through those things we just talked about and turning these, problems into solutions. And that became, cathartic in its own way. It became very healing for me, so that when I would reflect back on Glenn, there'd be these sad times, but there'd also be these inspirational times.
Sure.
And starting the foundation and then helping the first scholarship, going into the second year, the third year, the fourth year, it just got better and better. And, when we started the foundation, we didn't know what the future would hold. It was 2013. So we're saying, well, let's get an endowment, and we'll be able to protect, this foundation. So we'll have this base nest egg, and then we'll give charitable donations off of the interest earned off of the endowment.
Right.
Seemed like a very safe way to kind of keep the foundation installed in perpetuity in case we all moved on and did something else. So 5 years in, it's going well. We kind of have this regular cadence of charitable giving. And at this point, I'm married. I've had my first child, my son, Sebastian, and everyone's kind of getting on with their lives. But all of a sudden, we have more applicants for scholarships. This is in 2017, last year, then we had money to give. And for the first time, we had to say no to people. And so we have this big call, all the guys and the director, and we all went to high school together. We all grew up together, and we're all saying, like, well, this sucks. All right, well, who are we going to say no to? And we have to go through that process. And for me, it really sucked because I just didn't want to say no. So it kind of stuck in the back of my head, like, here's another problem. We need a solution for it. How do we increase our charitable donations? How do we get into corporate scholars? How do we get into meeting with different groups to help, to help get more money in so we can get more money out to help people? And I didn't have any answers. It was just kind of stuck in my head. But that was the segue into Bub's Naturals and how that whole thing started. That perfect, like, just random, life conditions that all kind of end up yielding to a brand new company.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for the listener, like, if there's anything, this is a little bit of a tangent, but if there's anything to get, like, from this, it's like this idea of just being solution oriented is just such a powerful way to go through life to ensure that you don't get stuck in a rut. Super strong.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really think about it in, like, motivational ways. I guess if I give pause and have a conversation, like, yeah, that makes total sense.
Right.
And I got you. Like, in the time, you're just sort of going, like, okay, how do I do this?
You're just living. Yeah.
Yeah, like right now, it's how many diapers am I going to change between now and tomorrow?
Right.
But we had these big moments, and so when we're looking back at Glen's legacy, it was fix the insurance stuff for his family, fix it for the future. And then, having done those things, it's okay, well, what's the next step? Well, the Congressional Gold Medal, and actually a little bit of an update on that, not to sidetrack us, but I got word yesterday that the Congressional Gold Medal for Glen and Ty and Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith's family got passed unanimously in Congress.
Oh,
so
cool.
It is now going to the Senate for a confirmation vote.
Wow. Hell yeah.
And that's a civilian honor. It's the highest civilian honor that Congress can give.
Right.
And it looks pretty good. I'm optimistic. If we circle back on this topic later, it's because I need your listeners to call their senators on their behalf. But it's just a really nice way to say, hey, these guys laid down their lives for America, and we're here to honor and respect the service that they had. So it'd be a really nice kind of wrap up to an otherwise really horrible situation.
Yeah. So now we're at this point where you're, like, having to say no to applicants, and so now you have a new problem.
Yeah. So I've got a consulting business. I'm starting my family, and I come home from work one day, and there's a tub of collagen on the counter. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now this idea's in the back of my head that we have to say no to people, and the foundation's kind of stalled out, and I don't have any answers for it, but it's definitely in my daily thinking. And my wife puts this tub of collagen in front of me, and she says, "You're not getting any younger. You need to start taking this." And for our listeners, my wife is 14 years younger than I am, and when she tells me to do something, for the most part, I do it.
Sure.
And so I asked a couple questions like, what the hell is collagen, and why do I want to take it? And we had a very colorful exchange around that because, of course, my knowledge of collagen was, isn't this that stuff that porn stars inject into their lips? Like, what is this stuff?
Right.
And she basically said, look, you're not getting any younger. Your knees are achy, and I need you young and healthy for our kids. And I was like, okay, say no more. I'll start taking it. And so I look at the jar, and it's unflavored collagen, grass-fed, pasture-raised. And I'm like, well, this looks great. How do I use it? Unflavored. So I put it in a cup of coffee because it says heat-tolerant protein. So I'm like, oh, I can, unlike a whey, it
won't denature in heat.
It won't denature in heat. So I'm
right.
like, oh, that's great. So I throw in a cup of coffee. I can't taste it. Well, I drink coffee every morning, so I throw a scoop in my coffee. 2-3 weeks into it, I look down at my fingernails, and I need the nail clippers. And I'm like, all right, something's happening here. Mm-hmm. Like, I've been in the supplement space, a world, like from running and CrossFit and all the different activities and snowboarding, surfing. I've taken whey protein, creatines, I've taken BCAAs, kind of run the gambit.
Yep.
And I can honestly say I've never really noticed a difference in any of them on my body. But all of a sudden, I've got this data point from the side of the jar that says stronger nails, longer hair, better skin, joint repair, muscle health, and intestinal health, gut health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, all right, so 3 weeks in, I need to clip my nails. A month in, I need a haircut. And I'm like ticking off the benefits, physically seeing these things happen to my body. Well, after 2 months, my wife and I had to fly to Boston. We were there for a week, and we ran every day. So we're talking like big running, lots of running, 6-8 miles every day, which for you is nothing. So don't look at me like that.
Not looking at you like anything.
It's cool. We're in a non-judging environment here, unless you say you only ran 8 miles. So anyways, I get back on the plane after a week, and we fly home. Now, normally, I would be crippled. At this time, I'm 45 years old, and my knees just suck. I can't squat like I used to. I'm in the land of diminishing returns athletically.
Health-wise.
Just, like I feel good, but my recovery is longer, and my joints are just a little bit beat up.
Yeah.
So we get back, we fly off, get off the plane, cramped up, cross-country, 5-hour flight. And I remember grabbing the bags and going, holy shit, my knees don't hurt. And I expected my knees to hurt. So it actually took a little while before I'm like, wait a second, what's wrong? Nothing hurts. I don't trust this at all.
Right.
But I'm ecstatic. So it took me a little bit longer. It was like, almost 2 months in before I could tick that box and say, my joints feel better. And it has been gangbusters ever since. Like, I became like the biggest collagen evangelist. And, I'm looking around like I used to take glucosamine, all these things that just never did anything.
Right.
And now I've got like my own body and the experience across all the benefits that it talks about I've enjoyed. And probably most enjoyably, the gut health, like just processing food better.
Yeah.
And so I've read about it a little bit, and then I just know that I'm going to be a collagen supporter for the rest of my life. Well, enter my business partner, TJ. So TJ Ferrara comes over to the house where, mostly we just work out together. Every once in a while we would just sounding board different work ideas. And he comes over to the house and he sees the tub of collagen. He's like, oh, you take that stuff? And I give him that same stump speech I just gave you. Like, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and says, well, we should start a company. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like, okay. And meanwhile, there's a 6-month-old crawling around on the floor.
Right.
And
ideal time.
I'm like, sure. What does it look like? 2 guys sipping coffee, just talking smack. And first thing we say, we just kind of look at each other and we go, well, we got to do something cool for charity. Now, he's approaching this from a totally different space than I'm approaching it. I'm approaching it with the bing, light bulb moment. Holy shit, we could do something here that could funnel money into Glen's foundation. TJ, and I hate speaking for him on this, but he's younger than I am. He's in his early 30s, and he had these aspirations to join the Navy, have a career in the military, and he got hit by a car and got a big TBI and basically was told, sorry, you can't enlist.
Right.
So really shitty circumstances, but he's always saved a portion of his business, and he's in e-commerce, got like 20 years of helping develop online sales platforms and sell through. And he's always wanted to help guys that have served since he couldn't serve himself. So we both come into this charitable conversation from different angles, and I just look at him and I'm like, well, I know the charity. It's got to be Glen's foundation. And Glen's call sign in the Navy was Bub. So in like a 10-minute conversation,
it all came together.
And then it was like, well, what do we do? So then we had to do some research. What does doing something cool for charity mean? Like, what does that actually entail? And this is all pie in the sky stuff. This isn't real.
Right.
But we do a little research and we figure out, like, look at Tom's Shoes with their 1-for-1 program. We look at Patagonia with their 1% for the planet. And we figure out these companies are doing between 1 and 3% of net profits to charity. And that's considered like best in class. So we're like, cool, let's do 10%. Like, let's blow that model out of the water. Let's really put a stake in the ground and do things, differently. And the supplement industry is one of the most uncharitable industries in the world. It just is. Like, if you're in the whey protein business, you're not giving your money away.
Right.
If you're in the creatine business, screw them. This is vanity built stuff.
Yep.
This is performance built stuff. This is not altruistic help your neighbor out stuff.
Right.
So, we find ourselves quite by accident having a product we want to go into that is laced with a lot of vanity properties to it, look good naked type stuff.
Right.
but we want to be charitable about it. And we have a very specific mission that we want to drive into. Like, we just wanted to give money to charity. The company kind of filled in afterwards. Like, it was just kind of a wild set of circumstances, and we decided to pursue it. So we're like, hey, like let's ask. Like, let's do the research. I call up like a handful of Glen's teammates, talk to his family, talk to our old high school friends, and every one of them came back and said the exact same thing. Glen will kick your ass if you don't do this. Like, he would kick your butt, so get out there and do it. And that was all I needed to hear was, and again, was going from feeling really weird and uncomfortable about starting a company dedicated to my dead best friend to promote his legacy and his charity, like, felt a little odd. Yeah. But everyone around me was like, no, like, this is
That's the thing.
This is the thing. Like, you actually found the thing. You got to do this.
Yeah.
Which
puts no pressure on the thing.
No, none at all.
Right.
And then, so then it's like, well, we got to, what does it cost to start this up? And do the numbers work? Can you really give 10% of every sale to charity?
When I heard about your business model, that was my very first question. So like a lot of the early listeners know that, this podcast started as a side project for my supplement business. We did the model of giving a percentage away to charity, and we didn't even do 10. We did 10% of profit. Yeah. Which, as I understand, is not what you do.
No. So right now we do 10% top line. So
I found it so hard to like balance that and to have a margin that was worth it. And so, it is the thing, but it's not an easy thing. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
It is the hardest thing.
Right.
So we didn't pay ourselves for a year. And we barely started to, because, you have to.
And that's on the back of some pretty substantial success.
Yeah. That's, it's a lot. There's a lot that goes into that. We're going to give, at the end of this year, in the next couple of weeks, we'll have written our last check for this year to the foundation. We'll close out the year just shy of $50,000 donated as a first-year business to the Glen Doherty Foundation. And we've done it, without really a marketing budget. We've been able to place a couple of online ads, and the testimonials and the support from our community has been phenomenal. Like, guys that Glen served with that have jumped on camera to talk about how they feel. One of our close friends is a combat controller who started taking bubs. We just were giving it to him just because, he's active duty, and when he was home and he wasn't deployed, we're like, here, we're doing this new thing, try it out. And he gave us this raving testimonial. My wife, as an endurance athlete and a runner, just a handful of people that have just come out of the woodwork. We got Nick Hardwick, he's a former NFL center. He was the captain of the Chargers. He played 11 years down here in San Diego. And, he's come on to give us these great testimonials about how much he loves it. So there's this enthusiasm for what we're doing that we've been able to build upon. But then at the end of the day, you got to balance your books. Mm-hmm. And when you give, that's almost $50,000 that you're not marketing your brand with, that you're not doing these other things with. And you got to manage your cash flow, because you got to buy all the collagen and the tubs and the lids and the scoops and the storage and the logistics and the fulfillment. You got to pay for all that up front. So we started really small. It was an experiment. Like, we each got our day jobs, and, TJ's doing his work, I'm doing mine. We each put money in together, and we're like, okay. And I kind of looked at a burn rate for myself. How long can I live without making any money? Mm-hmm. And at first it didn't matter. I had a couple clients, so I was still paying the bills. But by February of this year, when we were a couple of months into it, we realized that we had some momentum, and I kind of had that jump off moment where I'm like, I'm just going to do this. This is it. Okay, how long can I not pay myself for? And can I really tighten the belt? Meanwhile, we're having our second child.
Oh my God.
So now I've got a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, and I'm going all in on this business. And that is the real, like, grab your nuts and jump off the cliff moment.
Yeah, for sure.
But you can make the numbers work, and you just have to be really, really smart, lucky about how you're doing things. We tell our story to every vendor. We've gotten great terms from the people we work with. They are sympathetic to what we're doing, and we've earned their trust over the last year by paying our bills on time and being proactive about what our needs are and not biting off more than we can chew, which is why we started the business on Amazon and on our website, and have slowly started to build it to, to try and create a little momentum around it.
Yeah. It's got to be wild now to think about where you're at now with this company and sort of getting to the point where you can like pay yourself again and the risk has paid off. And then to look back at this just like wild last 20 years, like that's got to be crazy for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to look at life from the lens of a 23-year-old ski bum, like the snowboard bum who's running around, like just trying to get over to Europe to go ride here.
Yeah,
and living
right.
out of you're literally living out of a suitcase and a sleeping bag. And it was an amazing life. Like you realize you can live a very rich life without being rich. And that was, it's funny, that's on our website now. Like, this isn't about getting rich. This is about living rich. But in a way, I've kind of always traded experience over, the valuable goods that would come along with it. And this is no different than that. This is just, it's a different version of it for where I am. But I want to be able to go to Chile in the summer and go snowboarding in August because that's what I used to be able to do.
Right.
And it's still really fun. Oh, and I want to still snowboard at the level I used to and still perform athletically, and collagen is a gateway to this self-improvement that makes me feel like my knees are as good as they were 10 plus years ago. So even better.
Yeah.
It's all just kind of, serendipitously tied back together, or, pick the word.
Right.
But, I mean, it's an interesting position to be in, because now we're looking at Bubs into 2019 and we're saying, hey, we're NSF for Sports certified. We've taken these big leaps to help open up the audience. Let's go open up the audience. We found over the last year that people care about charitable giving. Mm-hmm. We found that we can manage the business on the 10% rule. It's tough, and doing top line revenue is not sustainable. You know this from your own business. It is totally not sustainable. You cannot manage the cash flow unless you are at some absolutely skyrocketed level, but 10% of net is possible. And so we're actually we're looking at that now. The example I was given was, you can give 10% of every sale and you're going to sell, 1,000 units. So you're going to give away, a little bit of money.
Yep.
Or you can sell 10,000 units and give away a bunch more money. What's more important? You want to help more people?
Right.
That's why you started this.
Right.
Or do you want to stick to this ideological rule that you established the business with?
Sure.
And that's a little bit of what we've been going through lately, is taking a look at that and saying, well, if we scale and we can help more people, we're going to help more people.
Yeah.
That's the logic train. You have to follow that.
Yeah. And that's the literal power of being mission driven. Like, I mean, with your business, with your life, with whatever it is, like if you're mission driven, you have an ideal end state, not like an ideal right now. And so by filtering all of your right now decisions off of that ideal end state, you're able to make responsible choices that are going to be in the best interest of the product or whatever you're doing going forward.
Yeah. We got asked a question. This retailer that's in the middle of onboarding us to, they've got 120 stores, and they were like, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 5-year vision? And TJ answered it right away. Just looked in the phone. He's like, help more people. Simple as that. And it's not a number. It's not, it's not something that we could measure, which was it was kind of a non-answer to the guy, but to him it was funny. It's exactly what he wanted to hear. We're like, yeah, we're not just doing this for fun. Like we want to help more people, and we can get there. And we're going to we're going to roll out a bunch of new products that are always going to match that lens of self-improvement meets helping others. So, and that's another investment, of course, is, how do you continue to do that, but keep your eye on the prize?
Right.
Collagen is a foundation for us. It works. It has got studies on it. My body, is proof positive, as well as all the other people that are taking it. And then, there's a lot of power in the coconut world. So we have our Mct oil powder, which is the most amazing, well, I'm a little bit biased, but
sure,
non-dairy creamer and energy source and all the cognitive function and gut health benefits that come from MCT. And so we have these two as our staple, and we're like, well, where do we logically take it past it, but be smart about our growth?
Yeah.
Because we're completely self-financed. So every penny coming in from people that buy, we put right back into what we're doing. And that's it's been a pretty neat position to be in because we're able to really keep things true to where we want it to go.
Yeah. So now that this last election is over, do you find that you're doing an inherently really good thing in the world, and the product is a really, just by being what it is doing a really good thing, not just for people's health, but also because of what it's doing, like what you're doing with the money. Do you find that the world is pretty receptive? I mean, we're in an altruistic generation right now, like with millennials coming of age, the idea that your company stands for something outside of profit almost has to at this point, right? In order to succeed, I would say.
I would say as a new company coming in, regardless of what industry you're in, yeah, you should stand for something bigger.
Yeah.
And that could stand for anything. It could be a firearm company standing for a different kind of self-improvement. But what are you going to do to support that and drive that forward? If you're, a new yoga studio, I mean, that's very Encinitas of me to say, but like, you have to stand for something a little bit past yourself. I think to make a difference to the consumer. And I'm in an industry that is inherently selfish, that is vanity driven. And so trying to push that rock uphill there feels a little bit different. But in this culture, it was a total unknown when we started. I truly, truly didn't know in September of last year when we launched the Bubs product on Amazon and on our storefront. I had no idea if anyone was going to care, because of that 10% rule.
Right.
And what I have found is that people really do care. And we have customers. We've got this great returning customer base. And it's not just friends and family. In fact, my sister was giving me a hard time because she's like, you haven't even gone back to Winchester and promoted this. Like, you got to tell everyone. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Like, all of Glen's high school friends and all the people we grew up with, they would care about this.
For sure.
All right, I'm going to go back next year and we'll get in front of them.
Yeah.
But, people do care. And yeah, there's a new election. There's a radically different political environment than 2012.
Yep.
A lot of the shadows of 2012 and Hillary Clinton's reputation from Benghazi definitely, they didn't help going into 2016. But culturally overall, you do have a sense there's a patriotism in this country that, was very different than even going back like before 9/11.
Right.
There's the idea of helping others that I think is kind of, it's gained more momentum, if you will.
Yeah. So it's like you have all of this tide that's working in your favor, which is huge in business. But then, so I guess my question is, the media cycle, the dust settles in 5 minutes. The media's onto something else. For the fact that this has been drawn out, like the Benghazi thing, for so many years is actually pretty wild when you think about it, because we even talk about September 11th, 8 years later. Like, this is a crazy thing. And so September 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm just curious now, like post 2016 elections, do you get any pushback? Do you find yourself in any of the political, or does it seem like the dust settled and you're sort of on your path finally?
You know what? So on a personal level, I feel like the dust has settled. So I had a lot of questions, and I was getting a lot of information that was conflicting about what happened that night.
Yeah.
What happened? Like, hey, there's this movie, 13 Hours. I can't tell you how many people have hit me up to say, should I watch it? Is it accurate? Did that actor that played Glenn do a good job?
Yeah.
And a lot of them were just like, wow, man, like, I never knew that about Glenn. Like, I never knew that side to him, because most people just knew Glenn as this cheery guy at the gym, or this guy that you would go skiing with, or that would cook you an amazing dinner. Like, it's a very bigger than life personality.
Yeah, yeah.
And to have it in this political lens, is very, very different. To see Glenn and Ty and the other guys get kind of like pulled back and forth inside this larger conspiracy, and not just conspiracy, but like the set of events that happened, and really unpacking that and understanding it became very important to me. And the congressional hearings really helped with that.
Yep.
Going out there and meeting with Trey Gowdy. I met with him twice. The last time was just this summer. And kind of getting that like final conclusion about, hey, guess what? This wasn't a conspiracy, but there were some mistakes that were made.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what those looked like. Oh, and Glenn, he was in Tripoli, and he did, in fact, was a part of a team that secured a plane to fly down to Benghazi to get all those Americans out of there. And by the way, Glenn didn't actually go to his bank and take out the $30,000 to rent the plane. The CIA had done that in advance of that. But I love that story.
Yeah,
You know, the idea that Glenn would literally be in Tripoli calling his bank in the U.S. to wire this money over to some sheik so he could borrow his plane to fly down and save everyone's lives. I was like, that's Glenn.
Yeah.
That's Glenn. That was one of the wilder things that was told to me. But it's in line with who he was.
So what were your thoughts on the movie?
I mean, it is largely accurate.
Okay.
In terms of like historical significance. There were some communication breakdowns. There were some wrong turns. There were some mistakes made on the ground, and there were some guys doing some really heroic things. And there were some guys that got left out, you know, kind of like to get fucked. And that wasn't happening from a conspiracy standpoint. There was no like secret strings. That was a bunch of guys and girls in Washington that were worried about the optics of what was happening, that were engaging in cover your ass type of politics. Like, this is happening, and I'm the guy who didn't approve the budget to have the security guys there at the consulate, and we didn't even get them sandbags, and how are we going to talk about this? What am I going to wear tomorrow at the press conference? And so you've got people that are covering their asses.
Yeah.
Well, the clock's ticking, guys. You know, there's literally people that could have deployed to help out there. We don't want an international incident.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of decisions that were made at a much higher level than I obviously operate. I operate on the human life level. I'm not thinking about the international politics.
Right.
I'm thinking save all those Americans. Like, this is me selfishly. Save Glenn. Save everyone that's with him. And
well, you say selfishly, but I would say the alternative is selfishly. Thinking about how to cover my ass in this situation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's odd because I was deployed in North Africa at that time, and we got spun up, and then we didn't end up doing anything. We ended up sitting in our gear all night, and then
3 hours away, 4 hours away, total transit, sitting on an airstrip,
legit. And then we get this news about this like YouTube video, and so we were just like, well, fuck, that's crazy. And that's all we, you know, because when you're deployed, you're like totally, you don't know anything that's going on in the real world. So all we know is we get spun up a little bit, start planning this sort of mission, and then like, oh, it's not going to happen. And also it was this YouTube video thing that spawned it. And so that was like the only word we got. And so it was like pretty wild to get back to the States and realize like the whole shitstorm that actually transpired while we were sitting on our gear. So yeah, fucking wild.
And I mean, to stomach that, you know, it's funny. So we have a really close friend of ours in that I went to high school with. And he's as masshole as it gets. And I mean, big, larger than life. And he'll talk to you like this. And he works for the State Department. So I won't use his name. But he's talking to us. And he's like, I'm going to tell you exactly who fucked up here. And we're looking for their names. And he gave me these names. And he's like, watch these names. These are the people that are responsible. And one name was Charlene Lamb. And the other one name was Kennedy. And he's like, watch those two names. It's going to take years. But if there is any justice in this, they're the two that were the most responsible for the lag in response and the conditions that led to it and the response afterwards. So it actually was like below the Clinton level. And sure enough, you know, a couple, like, I don't know, 2 years later, I hear about so-and-so getting fired. And then the next person gets fired. And I'm like, all right. And then you gradually hear these little bits of information about a little operation happening in Benghazi, like, oh, hey, Sean, got one of the bad guys. And I just get this very informally, right? Like, this isn't what I'm reading on the news. This is like, you know, get a text message from one of the boys like, hey, you know, smile today. Tip one back for Bub.
Right.
And that has been, as satisfying as you can take an experience like that, which is, hey, all right, like, yeah, justice is being served. I'm kind of, you know, I've kind of pursued this from a very different lens. Yeah. But yeah, when you hear that, you know, there's very real human error behind the tragedy and loss of human life, and that they, for very political reasons, try to protect themselves, that's pretty tasteless. And to hear that justice is served, you know, 2 years later, 3 years later, however long later, has definitely helped. It has definitely helped me, you know, digest everything. But, you know, I didn't live for those moments, but it's, yeah, you know, it's a little satisfying.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I don't pay attention to a lot of politics simply because I find that there's just so much. First of all, it's always wrong. Like the reporting is always wrong, like we just talked about. I've been in a bunch of conflicts and then seen it on the news and been like, well, that's definitely not what happened. And then on top of the fact that you have like misreporting, then you also have like the bias of the media outlet and then their interests. And so there's so many things that to me, it just doesn't make a good use of my time, but also because I'm spending so much time building my business and content and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just curious with you, did you have to just like get to a point where you were like, I got to tune the media part out so I can focus on this?
Yeah.
I mean, more recently.
Yeah. So interestingly, I would be very selective after getting through Glenn, like the funeral and getting through the memorial services. And there were 3 of them. I mean, this was one in Boston, one in California, one in Utah. Like these were all really big events. And then going back to visit with Congress, and then I'm getting married, and I'm going through those other life things that are happening at the same time.
Right.
I had to distance myself from it. One, because you could madden yourself without getting clear answers.
Yeah, sanity. Yeah.
But 2, that wasn't healing for me. It wasn't serving me to like pursue these answers. Like I knew at one point that they were going to come when the time was right, and I was hungry for them right after it happened. But by the end of 2013 into 2014, like I couldn't put all my energy there. I had a mortgage to pay. I had a family to raise, and I had to heal myself, and I had to work in this foundation. There were so many things I'd put in place that were a positive outlet. That one wasn't going to serve me well. That was not going to be a positive outlet to feast on the media and speculate and not know. So I was in the luxury position of knowing that sooner or later I was going to fly out to Congress and look at, confidential records, or I was going to have a conversation with some guys that were on the ground or on that rooftop with Glenn. And I'd rather save my energy and put it into those more substantial conversations on a personal level and on that one-to-one level than worry about what someone's going to say on CNN or on Fox or on any of those outlets. Because to your point, there's a massive bias that has been established in media over the last decade that has made it tough. It's funny, my wife's a news reporter. So I literally only go now for my news through AP Newswire. And it is one of the truly unbiased news sections to go to. And I'm like, that's it. I'm strictly AP. Because I would ask her, I'm like, where do you get your news from? Because you got like Huffington Post over here, and a bunch of my friends are all Huffington Post guys. And then I got a bunch of my Marine buddies that are all, over here on Fox News. And I'm like, you could not be more opposite.
Yeah.
She's like, AP.
Yeah.
So I found that serves me well, but I kind of tuned it out. And
you got to manage resources at some point, right?
So time is a currency.
Yeah.
And you never have enough time. You got all the time in the world when you're a kid. You got all the time in the world, but there does reach a turning point in everyone's life, especially I think once you've made a bigger commitment than yourself. And that time resource is finite, and you got to use the absolute most of it. So, where am I going to put my energy and my time? I got to put it towards other things, positive things. I got to put it towards my family. I have to put it towards my friends.
Yeah.
I have to put it towards my finances. Oh, I got to put it towards my fun. Make no mistakes. I got to put it towards my fitness, and I got to put it towards my faith. And I don't use faith as like religion. I use faith as this, overall, state of being. And all of a sudden you've got these I call them the F buckets. And I learned about this from this amazing life coach guy who was just like, hey, where are you putting your energy?
Yeah, I do the buckets thing too. You're
kind of working your way around these buckets. And, that world of negativity, there's no bucket for that. It's a time suck, but there's no bucket.
Right.
You're going to use a time suck, go watch a bad movie. That's 2 hours. Okay, you get credit on that one. But the news cycle of stuff that's not going to serve you, or being angry about the political conditions, or being frustrated without action, I can't think of a more counterproductive way to live.
Right. Yeah, good point. Now that you have, we're in this point where Bubs is sort of really, you're looking at scale now, and you're looking at other growth strategies because people are buying the product and it's doing what you wanted it to do. If you look back at all of your life choices and decisions and things you've been through, which is a lot more than most people at your age, if you were given a microphone and everybody would hear it, hopefully that will be Lionheart Radio, but maybe not. Everybody in the world would hear it. What advice would you tell people based on the life you've had?
So, big question, and I can definitely answer from the lens of a long chapter of my life of things I didn't do. I didn't listen very well for a long time, and what I would do is I would react. So I wouldn't respond, I would react. So I kind of hear what I think I'm hearing, and I just jump on it.
Yep.
And really, when Glenn died, there was this pivot for me of responding to what's happening, not reacting to it. Because if I reacted to it, that's where the negativity and the anger and the frustration would all come into play, and that wasn't going to serve me. But responding to it with thoughtful action was just this thing that happened. So if I'm going to go back in time, I would have responded to a whole lot of different life events leading up to that chapter differently. And reacting is just so knee-jerk, and you often miss essential facts, and you often don't really hear what you're supposed to be hearing to respond accordingly. So there's like this acronym, which I can't remember exactly, but essentially it's like stop, observe, breathe, and respond. And there's something else in there probably, but the idea of that is just, don't just react.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, evaluate what's happening, observe it, and then respond. So
yeah, I love that. We've actually never gotten that as an answer for the final question, so that's really cool.
Really?
Yeah, after hundreds of them, I like it. So because reaction it's an implicit. It's implicit. You're not deciding, but I like this idea that as you're going through your life and things present themselves, to ensure that you act by your own volition, you have to take that moment of consciousness to figure out how you want to proceed, instead of just sort of the implicit reaction to things. So that's great.
Yeah, funny. I honestly hadn't really thought about it much until you kind of put the question to me, and I'm like, well, this one's pretty big, and it definitely comes in. And I'm definitely no angel at that, because you can ask my wife about sometimes how I hear things, and she'll look at me and say, I didn't say that. I'm like, ooh, you're right. I forgot the observe part.
Yeah.
The react, not the respond. So it's a work in progress.
Sure, yeah.
And I think we'll all, as humans, we're going to work on that stuff the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Well, you have a super powerful story for people that are wanting to support the thing that you're doing in the world. Where's the best place for them to do that?
The whole world knows Amazon. That's always an easy one. We're on Amazon Prime. We have a great partnership with Amazon. We're actually on their Launchpad program for new companies trying to make a difference. Mm-hmm. We have our website, bubsnaturals.com, bubsnaturals.com. And those are probably the two. Rogue Fitness, for anyone who's out in the CrossFit, in the gym space. They've been great supporters of ours. So yeah, any one of those three, and you can learn a little bit more about our social and kind of the storytelling. We're always trying to, bring Glenn's, larger than life legacy out one little tidbit at a time there. So, that's where you find us.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I'm excited because I'm going to start taking the collagen product, and I'll definitely share with the audience some of my anecdotal experience with it, and then we'll definitely get something linked up. So we'll do a giveaway on the Lionheart Radio Instagram. So that'll be cool.
Absolutely.
Sean, I appreciate you taking the time.
Rick, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time with me too, and coming down here to Encinitas.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, buddy.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track and delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland.